Okay, welcome everyone. It's so great to have you here today on Earth Day. A special shout out to Stephanie Haig, Director of the CRC Community Relations Council at the Jewish Alliance, for partnering to make this event incredible. Also a shout out to David Belize, the leader of the Interfaith Coalition to Fight Poverty, and obviously a big intersection between that work and environmental work. So thank you for being here with us today. And also to Kai Salem, am I pronouncing your name correctly? And of course to Rabbi Yonatan Neril. Kai and Rabbi Neril are our two guests today. And welcome to everyone. I guess I'll just say one word, which is that I can't think of a more important topic. There is no planet B is a little trite, but the nature of our relationship to the planet we inhabit really is one that affects every area of our consciousness. It's not just that we've critically endangered our own species and so many that live on the planet, the ones that are left, but it's about the way in which we choose to live. And I think that's certainly an awareness I'm bringing today. I will say I'm bringing a moment of joy or good news, which is that the city of Providence just had an announcement at Roger Williams Park about eliminating really or not using any chemical pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers in any Providence city parks and green spaces, something we wouldn't even see, but is a kind of crucial announcement. And so I think it's good to start with leadership and good news and what that can look like, and highlight that. And I'll read bios and get out of the way so that we can start our discussion. First, I'll just start with Kai. Kai Salem is policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, where she advocates for practical, ambitious energy policies and programs to meet Rhode Island's climate goals. Kai graduated from Brown University with honors in environmental studies in 2018. Kai also serves as policy chair of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island, a member of the Rhode Island Clean Water Action Electoral Advisory Board, and a member of the West Broadway Neighborhood Association Board. We are so grateful that you have joined us for this conversation today, specifically so that we can make it not just about talking. They say something about talk being cheap, but so that we can find out about advocacy opportunities, what's going on locally, and really kind of link with some action. And then Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Neril is with us. Just pull up the bio here. Rabbi Yonatan Neril founded and directs the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development and its Jewish Eco Seminars branch. Raised in California, Rabbi Yonatan completed an MA and a BA from Stanford University with a focus on global environmental issues, received rabbinical ordination in Israel. He speaks internationally on religion and the environment and co-organized 12 interfaith environmental conferences in Israel and the US. He is the lead author and general editor of 3 books on Jewish environmental ethics, including the new publication Eco Bible, which I encourage everyone to run out and get now. Even during this, it's the one thing that's acceptable to do, that and eat lunch while listening to this, a bestseller in several Amazon Kindle categories, and really a great work. I have it on my shelf, and it's on his shelf right behind him. He lives with his wife, Shauna, and their 2 children in Jerusalem. And I should mention a Providence connection. I believe he is a former Dorot fellow. I hope it's okay to add that. People know Steve Jacobson kind of runs that a little bit out of Providence. And so welcome, Rabbi Neril. The format, Rabbi Neril is going to present for about a half hour or so. And then we'll have a chance to hear also from Kai about local advocacy opportunities, and we'll also have a chance for discussion, questions, and answers. So that's kind of the format. And yes, it is socially acceptable. It's lunchtime here. I think you're in Israel. It's probably dinner time there. It's acceptable to eat. Please do eat. And you can even do it with your video on if you're not self-conscious. Thank you, everyone, and we'll turn it over.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rabbi Barry and Stephanie and David, for organizing this today. It's great to be here with all of you, those who are joining via Zoom and those who are watching this on Facebook. I am originally from the States. I grew up in Northern California on an acre of land with an organic garden that I gardened with my mother. I moved to Israel about 18 years ago, and my wife Shana and our children Shacharia and Hallel live here in Jerusalem in this apartment that I'm now in. It's the evening here, and happy Earth Day to you. It's the 51st anniversary of Earth Day, so it's exciting to be here. It seems like most people on this call weren't alive for the first Earth Day, including myself. I was born in 1980. And I want to share with you a little bit of Jewish teachings that relate to ecological sustainability. But first, I just want to start with a story. I went with my kids last week and wife to the northern coast of Israel for a couple days. And we were walking on the beach, and the kids were playing, and we went for a walk in this nature reserve that's part of the beach. And in the middle of the walk, our son says, "What is this on my leg?" And he wasn't sure what it was, and we looked at it and we noticed it was tar, because, as you know, there was a tar spill here in Israel, and it also reached southern Lebanon and Gaza and the Egyptian Sinai. And we got tar on our shoes and our legs and our pants, which is really the least of the problem, because we're able to wash it off. But for the first time in Israel, since Israel's establishment 71 years ago, Israel experienced a tar spill. And it's likely that this tar spill relates to the hostilities between Israel and Iran. It's not totally clear, but that seems like a likely cause of it. And which also goes to show that nature knows no boundaries, and that unless we learn to live as one people on this earth, respecting each other, then nature also suffers. And when things hit nature, it also hits human beings, because we're part of nature. So with that short introduction, I'm going to do a share screen, and I'm going to do the share screen to a presentation about what I would call a Jewish approach to climate change. This is something that I've talked about before. I actually, my main connection to Rhode Island is that I was on the Durod Fellowship in Israel, and so came to Rhode Island a couple of times in relation to that. So here's the share screen, and so here you can see is the presentation on religion and the ecological crisis. So what does religion and what does Judaism have to say about ecological sustainability? So this topic is one that's close to my heart. And so there's the book that Rabbi Berry mentioned, Eco Bible, which my organization published back in October. And we are offering it. It's the first ecological commentary that relates to about 450 verses in the Torah. Volume 1 is on Genesis and Exodus, and we're publishing Volume 2 in a few months on Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So I'll just share. A man in a kayak, feeling quite cold, decides to make a small fire to keep himself warm. Within minutes, the kayak has a huge hole in it and sinks to the bottom of the lake, which shows that you can't have your kayak and heat it too. So this is my introduction to ships. I'm going to talk with you about a few different ships. The first ship is a ship that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in Israel about 2,000 years ago, talked about. He gives an analogy of people who were sitting in a boat, and one of them took a borer or a drill and began boring a hole in the floor of the boat beneath him or her. The person's friends said to him or her, "What are you sitting and doing to the boat?" The person replied to them, "What does it matter to you? Am I not boring beneath myself?" They said to him, "Your actions are of concern to us, because the waters are rising through that hole and flooding the entire boat." So this is one depiction of it, that the person says, well, I'm glad it's not on my end, although this is perhaps, not a true portrayal, because that person might end up in the sea along with the other people. This teaching in the Midrash, the Jewish oral tradition, is based on the book of Job, where Job said, even if I have erred, my error lodges within me. Job's friend said to him in response, for he adds rebellion to his error among us, he spoke, meaning you are bringing punishment upon us for your sins. And so I want you to think for a moment. I'm going to raise a series of questions that I want us to engage in a bit of a thought exercise. Why is the person drilling underneath their seat? It's easy to think, and I think this is most people's first reaction when hearing this story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that they think that the person is crazy, that the person's psychotic, they have no rational reason, and they're just doing something that is totally beyond the realm of reason, which is possible, although Rabbi Shimon doesn't give a reason for why the person's doing it. Rabbi Shimon doesn't say the person's state of mind. He just says that the person's doing it. So I want you to think of a rational reason for this behavior. And here's a few ideas that have come up over different times. One is to fish. Perhaps the person's hungry and they want to fish. A second possibility is they want to cool down their feet, that their feet are hot on the bottom of the boat, and this is a way to cool down their feet. Another possibility is they want to find fresh drinking water. They're thirsty and they want to drink something. Or perhaps they want to harvest seaweed. They're hungry and they don't have another way to get food. So the way they do this is by harvesting seaweed. So those are all rational reasons for why a person would drill underneath their seat, and of where they're not crazy, but they're just fulfilling a need that they have. The second question that I want you to think about for a moment is, what accounts for the disregard of other people's welfare? In other words, why doesn't the person care about what they're doing to the other people on the ship? A few possibilities in that regard. They think a small hole won't cause real damage. They think they're just drilling something that is insignificant and it's a big ship and it shouldn't cause the ship to sink. A second possibility is they cannot think about anything beyond their immediate need. They need to do this now. And it doesn't really matter what else is going to be. They have to drink, they have to eat something, they have to go to the bathroom, they have to cool their feet, whatever their need is, they need to fulfill it and they can't think about anything beyond it. A third possibility is they think the problem is long-term. If the ship sinks, it won't happen for a long time. And by the time that it sinks, they'll be off the ship. So they don't care about that. A third question that I'll raise, what can the people on the ship do to convince this person to change his or her behavior? Short of throwing the person overboard, how can they convince the person to stop doing what they're doing? So, let me just let you think about that for a minute. Any questions or any comments on what they can do other than throwing the person overboard to get them to stop? You can feel free to unmute yourself.
They can yell at the person.
Okay, they could yell at the person, and if they yelled, what would they say to the person?
Or chastise them or convince them. Yell, not specifically yell, but they could engage in some form of conversation attempting to change their...
Tie them up. You could tie them up.
Okay, they could tie the person up. I'm influenced by the teachings of Marshall Rosenberg in Nonviolent Communication, who talks about doing things with words that aren't violent. So I'll just restart the share.
If it's an immediate need, that you help them provide for that need without causing the damage.
Okay, great. So they could then that's along the lines here of what I'm going to share, that they could meet the person's needs in a way that does not involve drilling. If you're hungry, so here's some food. Or they can explain that the person's action will harm themselves too, that they should care about the other people on the ship, but they should also care about themselves, and what they're doing will harm them. And they can tell the person that their action impacts other people, and so that they should be concerned also about other people and not just think for themselves. Okay, that's ship number one. As I mentioned, I'm going to share with you about a number of ships. The second ship is Noah's Ark. Why didn't Noah go fishing? Because he only had 2 worms. The worms were unclean species, and if he used the worms to fish, there wouldn't be any more worms. Which animal was Noah distrustful of? The cheetah. Okay. So what did the people of Noah's generation do to trigger God to destroy almost all life on earth? That's a question, because this is the only time that this happened in the Torah, of where God said that God would destroy all life on earth. It's so therefore there must have been something that was unique about Noah's generation to cause God to do this. So one idea comes from the Midrash, from the Jewish oral tradition, that people in the society would go to a market and they would steal a peanut at the market. And when they did that, the police officer would arrive, and the vendor would say, look, this person stole a peanut. You need to arrest the person. And the officer would say, look, unfortunately, I'm not able to do that because the law system doesn't respond to such small acts of injustice. If the person stole a whole bag of peanuts, then they would be, committing robbery. But 1 peanut is less than a penny, and so I can't arrest the person. And so therefore, when people accustom themselves to committing small acts of injustice, God said, well, this isn't a human society that I think should endure. And so God decided to destroy everyone except for Noah and his family, because Noah was considered a righteous man. So here we can see that small acts matter. This is from the Machane Yehuda market in Jerusalem. Although a lot of that produce a lot of those dried fruits are coming from California. Ship number 3 is Jonah and the repentance of Nineveh. So many of you are familiar with the story of Jonah, that God said to Jonah that, you need to go and tell the people of Nineveh that they need to repent. Nineveh is in across the river from Mosul in northern Iraq. And Jonah didn't want to do that prophecy, so he went on a ship, and then God brought a storm specifically on the ship. And Jonah said to throw him overboard, so the sailors did. And then he found himself in the belly of a whale. Now, the question is, when Jonah prophesied, so he got out, once he was in the belly of the whale, he decided that he would do this prophecy, so he showed up in Nineveh. And when he prophesied to the leaders and the people of Nineveh, why did they change their behavior? What was special about what Jonah said that wasn't in the case, for example, with Egypt? Because in Egypt, God brought 10 plagues, but only at the end of the 10th plague did Pharaoh say, I will let the people go. So there's a midrash that says that Pharaoh survived the splitting of the sea and became the king of Nineveh. That Pharaoh was the only person to survive the splitting of the sea. And so therefore, when Jonah showed up and said, I speak for God, this is a sink or swim moment for Nineveh. Do or die, repent or face God's wrath. Pharaoh repented and caused Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, to change course. So that's a midrash. And that's an example in the Torah of a society that repented when a religious figure showed up and said, you need to change course. So unfortunately, on the Titanic, there wasn't a group of clergy that showed up to Captain Smith and said, you're in a dangerous situation right now. You need to power down, and let's just wait this out until the day when we have better visibility. Unfortunately, that didn't happen on the Titanic. It's an apt metaphor for industrial society because it was powered by 46,000 horsepower. In our times, Air Force One has 240,000 horsepower. And Captain Smith, as you know, was warned about icebergs ahead. So why did he sail full steam ahead? Captain Smith is this one over here with all these medals because he was considered really, one of the top captains alive 100 years ago, 110 years ago. So one possibility of why he sailed full steam ahead is that nature was different than he expected it to be. The Titanic sailed into an ice pack 100 miles long and 100 miles wide. 1912 was the most intense winter in that area in 30 years. And so it actually was exceptional what the Titanic went into. Another possibility is that he thought the ship was unsinkable based on his belief that industrial society is stronger than nature. And this belief pervades human thinking today, as it has actually for hundreds of years, that we're stronger than nature. And maybe the human project is to rule over nature. And that's actually what some people think is the meaning of Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and conquer it and dominate the animals and the birds and the fish. That's actually for another session. What's the Jewish understanding of that verse, which happens to be very different than the simple meaning. But another possibility is that Captain Smith thought he would be able to avoid a collision in time, yet they only had 35 seconds after spotting the iceberg to turn the ship. And at that point, it was too late. They couldn't avoid the iceberg in those 35 seconds. It's also interesting that people on board assumed the captain was taking care of them. However, in the hours before they hit the iceberg, Captain Smith was in a dinner with the great philanthropists on the ship who put on a dinner in his honor. And so the people didn't realize that he was consuming prime rib and cocktails and then went to bed. Sailing, disaster, and today in the bottom of the Northern Atlantic. So so now I'm going to, in the last 10 minutes of this presentation, and then I'm, happy to hear what Kai says and open it up for questions and comments. But I'm going to sort of connect it a little more to our situation, because you've probably been, I'm not giving a history class, and I'm not just talking about ancient Jewish texts because they're interesting. I actually think that by bringing religion on board to address the ecological crisis, that we can solve the crisis instead of just dealing with the peripheral issues. Just as the Titanic hit an iceberg that was 90% below their perception, so too in our current crisis, we only see the surface of the problem: fossil fuels, climate change, and more. And I do have to applaud, the state of Rhode Island for setting up the largest wind farm in the United States. So, I celebrate that this Earth Day. But the underlying issues are much deeper: greed, apathy, arrogance, and instant self-gratification. And during the year that I was in Israel on the DeRoad Fellowship, I was able to study with some rabbis who helped me to look deeper into Jewish perspectives on these root issues. So ship number 5 is planet Earth. We can think of the atmosphere as the bottom of the ship. Global carbon emissions have been rising for hundreds of years, but most dramatically in the past few decades. The greatest per capita CO2 emissions are in the United States, which are about 10 times higher than in Africa. One thing that we found in the past number of years is that actually science has been too conservative, even climate science, that nature is different than we expected. And scientists underestimated the severity and pace of climate change. What scientists thought would happen in 2100 is happening now. And we're just starting to wake up to that. The fires, the destabilization of the Arctic jet stream, the weakening of the ocean currents, the many factors. In addition, we've essentially created a series of icebergs that we're now colliding with year after year, whether it's drought, flooding, and we're drilling small holes on the collective ship through our daily consumption. Each of us is acting rationally to meet our needs and desires, yet together our actions are crazy and destructive. the solution to egoism is spirituality. In other words, and this is why I believe that that teaching from Rabbi Shimon about drilling on the ship is the Jewish teaching that most directly relates to the crisis we're facing, is that on the one hand, we're totally crazy and irrational in what we're doing. And our grandchildren, I'm sure, will say that much. They're like, it's sort of like, like nuclear testing that they did next to Native American communities. It's like, how could you do that? Like, no, but they didn't. Well, that's a deep topic in and of itself. And but we have our needs, and whether it's to fly, and we also have our desires. And that's another key aspect, is determining what is a legitimate need, what is a desire. And that's where the soul comes in. The Zohar, the great book of Jewish mysticism, says that the soul is likened to a ship, because the soul guides our body in this world, in this physical world. The ecological crisis is not only about the birds and the bees, the trees and the toads, it's also about the soul and how we live as spiritual beings in a physical reality. And Henry David Thoreau said that for every 100 people hacking at the branches of the tree of evil, one person's hacking at the roots. And the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo Aderet, said 700 years ago, if we address the root issue, the peripheral issues will fall away. And I believe the root issue here are spiritual issues: greed, apathy, arrogance. And religious teachers, and I applaud Rabbi Dolinger for his leadership, because you might think that every rabbi speaks about ecology, but it's actually not the case, unfortunately. Most rabbis don't speak about ecology, or at least don't speak about it very often. And I'm not just picking on rabbis, it's also true with clergy in other religions. And it's essentially a universal problem in religion that many religious people and clergy think that religion is one thing and ecology is another thing, and never do the two meet. And so therefore religion can sort of do its thing, and let's just leave it up to those environmentalists to solve the problem, because this is an environmental problem, so the environmentalists should solve it. And we'll just have the 85% of people that identify with a religion, do the religion thing. And I feel like that's part of the reason why in the past 51 Earth days, emissions have been going up, plastic use has been going up, fossil fuel use has been going up. How could it be? We've had 51 Earth days. Why is it that we celebrate every Earth Day where it shouldn't? Extinction Rebellion has the mourning events of where they walked through London with a giant balloon of the Earth and a funeral for it. And this is part of the challenge of the ecological movement is how not to be too pessimistic. And so I think religious teachers can help us to think long-term, moderate consumption, and find greater pleasure in the spiritual and communal. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory said, hope is a human virtue, but one with religious underpinnings. At its ultimate, it is the belief that God is mindful of our aspirations, with us in our fumbling efforts, that God has given us the means to save us from ourselves, that we are not wrong to dream, wish, and work for a better world. Hope is the knowledge that we can choose, that we can learn from our mistakes and act differently next time. And so I believe that a key contribution of religion is offering hope. So part of the work of my organization, the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development, is that we've organized 12 conferences on religion and ecology together with partners. This is a conference that we held at Catholic University of America, for Mid-Atlantic seminary and deans of Christian and Jewish seminaries. This is a conference we held in Jerusalem. This one we held in LA. So we held them in Atlanta, Dallas, Columbus, Ohio, other cities also. So clergy can inspire people to appreciate altruism rather than physical consumption. And the act of giving can actually help us to have positive feelings, according to studies. So at a personal level, I'm not saying that the physical aspects of ecology are irrelevant, but I am saying that I believe clergy should help motivate people to live an ecologically sustainable lifestyle. So composting, decreasing meat and dairy consumption, decreasing air travel, buy in bulk, reuse and reduce. I'm I'm happy to say I haven't been on an airplane in a year and a half. And I imagine that's the case with a number of people. And I don't miss traveling on an airplane. I don't miss going through customs and through security and, being 3 a.m. transferring flights. It's like, I mean, yeah. So I'm going to conclude. Also bicycling, walking, taking public transportation, Earth to humanity, don't take the slow boat to China. Winning too slow on climate change is losing. As Bill McKibben said, we're all in the same boat and we need all hands on deck, especially the 6 billion people that identify with a religion. The question is not, did my actions change the world? The question is, did I do everything in my power when everything was at stake? And so I'll just finish with a short story that the African-American Nobel laureate Toni Morrison told, is about a bird. A young boy comes to an elder woman with a bird in his hands, and he says to her, "Can you tell me whether the bird in my hands is alive or dead?" And she realizes the boy is playing a trick on her, because if she says the bird is dead, he'll open his hands and the bird will fly away and she'll be wrong. And if she says that the bird is alive, he will close his hands and crush the bird, and either way, she's wrong. He's got her coming and going. So she thinks to herself for a minute, and she says to the young boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the life of the bird is in your hands." And this relates to going back to the captain of the ship. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, we need to think of ourselves as each as the captain of the ship. He said this in relation to Jewish engagement and assimilation, but I think it applies just as well to the future of all species on this earth. There's no captain that we can say is sailing humanity to clear waters right now. Each of us needs to step up and say, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to give it my all. And so I just bless us this Earth Day that we should really, connect deeply to the deep teachings in the Jewish tradition, and for those of other faiths in your faith's tradition, and to really help to reveal a sustainable path for humanity. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. I think you ended on a good point, which is kind of thinking about our own, not only just our personal changes that we can make, but also policy. And, the work that I do at the Jewish Alliance, we really try to think about all of the personal changes we need to make for ourselves and in the Jewish community. But I think probably many of us on this call know that our government policy is probably the biggest way to make significant change on a lot of issues. So it's a constant balance of all of those forces. So we wanted to make sure you all knew kind of what was happening in Rhode Island around environmental justice and policy. So we invited Kai to come share a few words about some of the work that she's doing on local advocacy, and then we'll open it up for questions from everyone. So I'll turn it over to you, Kai.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for inviting me. Also, sometimes my internet isn't great, so if you can't hear me, let me know and I'll turn off my video, and that usually helps everything go smoothly. Stephanie, will you enable screen sharing for me?
Try now.
Okay, great. Great, can you all see that? I think so. So my name is Kai Salem. I'm the policy coordinator at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. That's a nonprofit based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've been working since 1982 to make energy systems work better for consumers. That started off as affordability, but over the last few decades, we have transitioned to becoming an organization that is all about reaching our low carbon future and acting on the climate crisis. We do that through both programs and advocacy. We help individual consumers make green energy choices, but my job is all about policy and making changes at a larger level here in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I am also the policy chair at the Environment Council of Rhode Island, which deals with other issues beyond energy and climate. It's a coalition of over 60 environmental organizations. We've been around since just after the first Earth Day, and we coordinate our actions around environmental policy, events. We do so many different things, but again, today I'll focus on the policy side of things. And on the right here, I'll just point out this picture of several ECRI leaders and the governor, Governor McKee. This was at the signing of the Act on Climate down in Newport that happened 2 weeks ago. And I am so excited about the Act on Climate because it is the first important piece of environmental legislation that Rhode Island has passed in years. The last about 3 legislative sessions saw 0 action on the environment. And I think that's because legislative leaders were not hearing the call from Rhode Islanders, in addition to some of the leaders being kind of climate deniers. They were not hearing the call from Rhode Islanders that the environment is important. But this session, we have made our voice heard, and that resulted in the most important piece of climate legislation to ever pass in Rhode Island. This bill makes our climate targets mandatory, economy-wide, and science-based. And Rhode Island now is legally required to meet carbon emissions reductions goals of 45% by 2030, 80% by 2040, and to get to net zero by 2050. This is in line with what other states are doing. It is a little bit less aggressive than the goal that Biden just announced for the United States. And it is less aggressive than what we would want to see ideally in globally to reduce the biggest impacts of climate change. But I think it's an important start, and it will unleash the floodgates, so to speak, of environmental legislation going forward, because now Rhode Island has to meet these targets, and we need to put in place the policies that will protect our communities, reduce emissions, protect public health from air pollution, and more. I won't dig into the details of all of the different policies that we foresee can get us to these goals, although I'm happy to go into that if you all have questions. But I will point out along the bottom of this slide is a breakdown of where our emissions in Rhode Island come from. So our emissions are coming from transportation. That's the biggest piece of the pie. They come from our homes and buildings, the natural gas, oil, and propane that we use to heat our homes and cook. And they come from electricity. So that's the fossil fueled power plants that are producing electrons that go into our homes. We need to reduce the fossil fuels, cut out fossil fuels from all of these areas of our economy if we are to meet our climate goals. But the good news is that we can do that in a way that stops local air pollution, especially in our most vulnerable communities that tend to be people of color, low income, within cities that have trucks and cars and industrial facilities. The policies that we are working on now that Act on Climate has passed, and that we invite Rhode Islanders, the Jewish Alliance, everyone to come support, include a 100% by 2030 renewable electricity standard. This bill would get us to 100% renewable electricity by 2030. We need to extend and strengthen energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the best strategy to reaching our climate goals because it reduces the cost of our utility bills and makes our homes more comfortable and more safe to live in. And it also reduces the demand for electricity and heating that is going to be greater as we electrify. We also need to implement the Transportation and Climate Initiative. This is a regional program to fund clean, affordable, and equitable transportation. Our transportation systems are one of the biggest drivers of carbon emissions, as you saw in the previous slide, and transportation is also one of the lack of access to transportation is one of the biggest drivers of continued poverty and inequity. Including here in Rhode Island. Or the Environment Council of Rhode Island will be prioritizing several other policies that are not as closely linked to climate change, although of course all of our ecological crises are interlinked. Those include waste reduction. There's a bill, there are bills to regulate PFAS, which are
You're freezing a little bit, so you might want to turn your video off.
Chemicals. Great, just turned off my video. Thanks, Stephanie. PFAS are toxic forever chemicals that stay in our water. They come in particular from food packaging, but they're microplastics that come from all over the place, and they cause cancer, huge public health hazard that is currently unregulated. And there's a variety of other policies that we are considering as priorities for the rest of this legislative session. The climate crisis campaign was something that the Environment Council of Rhode Island launched a year and a half ago, recognizing that we needed a larger call for climate action here in our state because legislators at the time were not hearing how important and concerning crisis is to Rhode Islanders. Finish line. The climate crisis campaign is not done. This year, we just voted to make the 100% renewable electricity standard our #1 priority for the rest of this legislative session. That's because that bill will help meet our climate goals, will also reduce local air pollution from fossil fuel facilities, and will get us on track. We also are working on transportation and climate initiative and working to support the education on climate action in many other ways. This is a good way to find out about public events to take action on the climate crisis. And so I encourage you all to sign up. Here are some resources. If you want to learn about how to reduce your own personal greenhouse gas emissions footprint, we have a ton of resources on that at greenenergyconsumers.org. We will have upcoming policy events and climate advocate trainings, which will train you to be a strong advocate for climate policy through the climate crisis campaign. And I just posted a blog on blog.greenenergyconsumers.org about our climate policy priorities for the rest of this legislative session and how they will help us reach our Act on Climate goals. One thing I do want to specifically call out is that none of the policies that the Environment Council of Rhode Island is prioritizing right now, or at least most of them, they're not explicitly focused on environmental justice. And I think that's a huge gap in what we're doing right now. So I'm putting that out there in hopes that we can engage with stakeholders across the table to improve our justice-focused policy priorities and make sure that next legislative session, we are part of a coordinated push to center justice in the work that we are doing. And that's all I have prepared, and happy to take more questions at some point if you all have them.
Great, thank you. Thank you both so much. We probably have about 10 minutes, so I'll just open it up for questions. I think people are welcome to just unmute themselves and ask any questions or have any comments for the speakers. I'll give you a minute now to do that if you have any questions.
Yeah. Hi, sorry, I had a question for Kai. And Kai, you might not know this because it's not specifically energy consumption related, but you mentioned environmental justice, and what popped into my, you need to stop. What popped into my mind was the ongoing issue with lead piping in Providence, and how many of us, can afford to just change the pipes we need to change, but so many people cannot. And I have looked into this for a while and felt like Providence Water was really trying to push responsibility off on the consumer. And I was wondering, do you know anything about this or where I should be looking? But that was my first thought when you mentioned environmental justice, specifically in Providence. And thank you, both of you guys, for an awesome talk today.
Of course, yeah. Lead is such a huge issue in Providence. I know it's a concern in my house. The organization that does the most work on that, I believe, is called Childhood Lead Action Project. And I don't know of any specific policy solutions that people are working on right now, but I agree that it is one of a number of justice and environmental issues that affect especially Providence, but the state overall.
I know that the lead piping is as part of the Biden infrastructure plan that they're trying to pass, like on a federal level. I was wondering, Kai, if the Environmental Council is involved with the Rhode Island Coalition. Their bills are pretty focused on environmental justice stuff. I'm sure you know those bills. Yeah, but wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we have had a lot of discussion about those bills as the Environment Council, and after extensive review, decided to support the Green Justice Zones bill, but have some pretty big concerns about all three of them, but particularly the other two, and hope to be able to support them next year after some collaborative revision.
Great.
Can I have a question? Is the state of Rhode Island giving any rebates if people want to change their house or get an electric car? Are there incentives that Rhode Island is going to be giving for people to encourage them to do these things?
I love this question. This is very up green energy consumers' alley. So on the home and building side, if you haven't gotten a free home energy audit through National Grid, even if you're a renter, everyone should do it because you can get easy fixes like your light bulbs fixed, and they'll also connect you with incentives to get energy efficient appliances. I got my fridge replaced. I convinced my landlord to get me a new fridge because there was such a big rebate through National Grid. There's also huge incentives up to, I think, $2,000 off per unit of insulating and weatherizing your homes. And if you currently heat on oil, propane, or electric resistance, there are incentives in the thousands or more for getting a high efficiency electric heat pump. High efficiency electric heat pump is the most sustainable option for heating that's on the market. So those are really great. And on the transportation side, there is a federal incentive to buy electric vehicles. For most electric vehicles, it depends on the car manufacturer, how big the incentive is. Rhode Island used to have a state incentive on top of that. That's something that hasn't been available since 2017 because the funding source dried up. But one of our hopes is that with implementation and passage of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, we'll be able to support incentives for buying electric vehicles once again. And Green Energy Consumers operates a program called Drive Green that negotiates bulk discounts essentially with car dealers in Rhode Island. So we're often able to offer up to $10,000 off of a new electric vehicle. We have so many different electric vehicles in our program, so you can find that on our website at the Drive Green page.
Are you sending everybody your website so we can log on?
We'll send everything in the fall. We'll send up a follow-up email with some of these resources for everyone, so you have them in one place.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hey,
I'll say our house, we had no insulation in our house. We found out when we had our National Grid free eval, and I think they subsidized it at like 90% for us to have insulation added to our whole house. So it's a pretty generous program. So if you haven't already, I recommend everyone should reach out to them. David, it looks like you had something you want to say, David?
Sure. Thank you for having me here from the Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty. I'm also the Environmental Justice Chair for the Sierra Club in Rhode Island. And I'm glad that justice is on people's minds. As an environmental justice organizer here in Rhode Island, lead poisoning and asthma rates are a really big issue. About 1,000 kids get poisoned every year, and it's disproportionately impacting poor and communities of color. I wanted to say that, as from the Sierra Club's point of view and the Interfaith point of view, if you wanted more information on the Renew bills, which we are supporting all of them, you can go to, let me get the website correctly, renewnewenglandalliance.org. They are bills focused on justice. We are happily supporting them. But I want to thank all of you who are here and for creating this program. And thank you very much.
I had a quick question for Rabbi Neril, and also just extending the gratitude to everyone about, you spoke about kind of the spiritual kind of psychology, for lack of a better word, of consumption, and kind of reducing our reliance on that. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering is, it often feels to us, Naomi's here with me, like consumption is kind of foisted on us, and we happen to have a child, and for birthdays, other things, there's just a lot of crap, a lot of stuff. Organizations and institutions too, even ones that are ostensibly committed to environmental goals, send us bags of plastic, whatever, promotional all the time. And I guess I'm wondering, are there any concerted efforts that anyone has considered, or just, because isolated, we could tell people, yeah, please don't get us stuff for our child's birthday. We don't need stuff. You're going to destroy the world or something. But that makes us sound insane to regular people. And also people want to give stuff because it's the way they've been conditioned to show love, is with stuff. So I guess I wonder, one of the challenges I see, and I'm wondering if you have a kind of thought about that, Rabbi Neril, or like, how do we condition people to show affection on a societal level, or how do you start that without things? I know how to do it. You can, say hello, say I love, like there are easy ways you can write a poem. You can express love easily without things, but how do you do that? Just throwing that out there.
I mean, you're throwing it out there, and I would imagine you've spoken about this topic in your congregation, because if not, then it would make a very good topic of conversation, because I think part of the way that we change culture is by speaking about it. And you as a religious figure in your congregation have that ability. Look, I think it's, I use Facebook, for example, for that purpose. What you're describing is that to live an ecologically sustainable lifestyle while embedded in consumer society is very difficult. It's sort of like swimming upstream. How could you tell everyone not to give your child plastic for their birthday? But once you have a reputation for being that person who's swimming upstream, if someone gives you plastic, they will apologize. They'll say, I'm so sorry that I'm giving you plastic, but, and other people will come to give you durable toys made out of, sustainably harvested cotton or wood or other products or handmade things. Or they'll say, instead of giving you a present, I'd like to take you on a nature walk. I'd like to give you some of my time instead of some of my money. Those are a few thoughts.
Or a donation to an organization.
Or because we don't live in Israel, a donation to our Jewish children's private Jewish education.
Right. Can I add something to that real quick? I'm sorry. And this had to do with what Rabbi Neril was talking about along these topics, is this idea of modeling. Our experience with that has been that once we refused to give gifts like that, even to adults, they realized we were serious. And that could be weird at times, but it really is this idea of being the change, you want to see, which is a lot harder, I think, sometimes too, than just telling people no. So.
Does anyone have any other last thoughts, questions, comments?
I have a question for Rabbi Neril. I was wondering, as in your work with the interfaith partners, I'm struck by the fact that so many climate deniers are, supposedly observant Christians. And so I'm wondering if you've developed any good sort of theological arguments with people from that sort of point of view that have been effective.
Yes, I have had some, good conversations with observant Christians and Jews and Muslims and others who deny climate change. As I said in my presentation, I think the ecological crisis is actually a crisis of religion. And that relates to my question of, well, why when we celebrate Earth Day every year, are we celebrating a further state of ecological degradation? that this Earth Day, it was actually worse than the last Earth Day in some respects. And I think that's because religion has been on the sidelines. And so in terms of, for example, my organization, as I mentioned earlier, we organize these conferences on religion and ecology for seminary deans and faculty. And we had a professor at the Fuller Evangelical Seminary in Pasadena, California, speak at the seminary. And that's the largest seminary in America and is an evangelical seminary. And so, he's a professor. Tommy Givens is actually very ecologically aware and has a course on creation care. We've also, been in conversation with the World Evangelical Alliance, which has a sustainability office. And had some communication with the National Association of Evangelicals. Evangelicals are not of one, ilk. There's a big diversity of views within evangelicals. So, for example, the Southern Baptist Convention is more conservative and is not part of the World Evangelical Alliance. And I was actually on a podcast a few months ago with a pastor who's of a congregation in North Carolina that's a member of the Southern Baptist Convention. And this pastor himself is ecologically aware. He lives in rural areas and grew up on a farm. So, and that's also with Eco Bible. We've mailed a copy of this book to 400 clergy, including the Catholic religious leadership in America, 50 Anglican bishops, a number of evangelical pastors. So, this book, Eco Bible, draws on thousands of years of Jewish Bible commentary, and many evangelicals and Catholics appreciate that Jews have this tradition, going back, and so that's part of the reason we're trying to reveal it and trying to get it in the hands of some of the thought leaders in those communities.
Beautiful. There's actually an organization also that we've been mildly involved with called Green Faith, and they actually took a group of clergy to the wind farm off Block Island a couple summers ago, and I was able to go on that with Brana Deutsch, who's the current president of Beth Shalom, who was working with green energy at the time, and it was faith leaders from all around New England and the Northeast. We were just the lucky ones who only had to drive 40 minutes to get there. So there are some really exciting things going on. Mm-hmm. I think I'm just going to wrap up. I've been taking notes because there's been a lot of great resources being thrown around in other organizations. So Rabbi Dollinger and I will work up a follow-up email to everyone so you can all read about these things and others. We do have an event coming up in May that Tiferet Rose will be moderating. It's all about using local food in your cooking through the Jewish Book Council. And we are going to be announcing a very exciting project supporting our local food economy here in Rhode Island with Lighthouse Kosher, which I'll give you a little teaser that we'll be working with all the local kosher restaurants to kind of do we're calling it Top Nosh Rhode Island. So it's a kosher food competition, a great gift to give people who don't want to get more plastic. You could gift it to people as well. So everyone who attends this program will be entered to win one of those booklets. And I just want to wrap up, I was thinking about, just this program, and David, as we mentioned at the beginning, with some other environmental justice groups organized a program this morning. And one of the speakers, who now I can't remember who said it, was quoting Bishop William Barber, who spoke at the Interfaith Coalition last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't even know when that was. But he's the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. He's just a very influential faith leader, really inspirational. And this person this morning was quoting him saying, you know, in 100 years or our children's generation, we don't know if they're going to live in a blue state or a red state. We don't know if they're going to live in the city or the country. But what we do know is that our children are going to need clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe, trees to shade themselves, and that those are universal. And even though things are so politically divided right now, and I mean, I think unless you've been living under a rock for the last few years, you know, things are only seemingly getting more politically divided. It behooves all of us to find real ways to address this crisis, and to move away from kind of, you know, the politicization of this conversation and really think about how are we making real change in our community. And I think what Rabbi Yonatan said, you know, really thinking about it from a faith perspective, the soul of this issue, and that, you know, really getting to the soul of that in our own communities and what's holding us back. I'm going to really take that with me as we go on with this Earth Day, but also continue on with this work. So encourage you all to continue to do the great work you're doing, and to get more involved with any of the groups that I'll be sending out. It doesn't have to be with the Jewish Alliance. It doesn't have to be with any of the other groups, but there are a lot of great options out there. So I urge everyone to just find something that resonates with them. And hopefully next Earth Day, we can feel like we're moving, you know, our emissions are going in the right direction and we don't have to, you know, use the same rhetoric. So thank you, Rabbi Yonatan and Kai, and everyone for joining us. Thank you.